This is the 415ers podcast brought to you by the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network with 95.7 The Game. Evan Giddings, Mark Grandy. Follow Mark on social at Mark Grandy. Mark with a C, Grandy with an I. I'm on social at eGiddings10. Feel free to download, rate, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, I want to stick on Deebo Samuel here, Mark, because this is, to me, where the game changed. Yeah. Now, you look at the totals, 165 a touchdown, and we referenced the drive, 13 plays out of the second half, 75 yards results in a score that the Niners then do not look back from, a part of their 25 unanswered in the second half. But the play, of course, which everyone was fuming and then applauding after the end of the game, was at the 10:26 mark of the third quarter, a 3rd and 7. Brock Purdy hits Deebo Samuel on a crosser over the middle, goes for 21 yards. But at the end of the play, of course, Jonathan Abram, defensive back for the Seattle Seahawks, does a little bit extra and does something that everyone in the know would like to call Bush League, which is grab Deebo Samuel's ankle, twist it to the point where Deebo had to leave the field. Fortunately, was able to return, but everyone was maybe fearful that it had been a little bit worse. Deebo Samuel said after the game it was a play that he had to basically exhale, breathe, because he was so angry that Jonathan Abram had done something that was Bush League, that was wrong, and that nearly hurt him. And from then on, the 49ers clearly took that as an individual slight, as a team slight, and they ransacked the Seahawks all the way back to the Pacific Northwest, telling Jonathan Abram basically to hold that L. We'll beat you on the football field, even if you want to pull that stuff like you did. So, I mean, I'll give you the floor, Mark, but that to me is where the game really turned in favor of the 49ers and for worse if you're the Birds.
100%. And, I mean, first of all, it was a huge play. 3rd and 7 from the 37-yard line. You're still down at this point. This was, as you mentioned, the first drive of the second half, so you're down by a point. At that moment, you're not really in field goal range, and you're facing a third and pretty difficult. And Deebo Samuel was pretty well covered on that play, made a really nice catch, and as he always does, did not go down with the first tackler, did not go down with the second tackler, broke a few, got the first down, rumbled all the way down to the 16-yard line where Jonathan Abram and a couple other Seahawks brought him down. And then in the scrum, as everyone's getting back up, as you say, Abram grabbed his leg, kind of twisted it and lifted it up into the air as he was getting up off the ground. Deebo Samuel was in a lot of pain, said he just stayed down on the ground because he knew he was going to freak out if he got up and probably draw a penalty on himself. So good thinking by Deebo, who also admitted he kind of blacked out in the moment after it happened. Not only is it a questionable play, you said Bush League just because of potential injury ramifications, Evan, but also, Jonathan Abram, what are you doing? That's Deebo Samuel. You know that he thrives on this stuff. Are you trying to poke the bear? Are you trying to wake him up? I mean, at that point, he had a relatively calm first half. Deebo Samuel, 2 catches for 25 yards, 2 carries for 29 yards in the first half. Not a terrible half by any means, but that's not the elite Deebo Samuel that we're used to seeing in the postseason. He did most of his work in the second half, and most of it immediately following Jonathan Abram's leg twist of Deebo Samuel. It's a bad sportsmanship move, but it's also a bad move for your football team because you woke Deebo Samuel up, and he is the main reason the Niners dominated in the second half.
Yeah, you know, you woke up a sleeping giant, however you want to put it. I think it also was a bit of a spark for the entire team. And maybe that defense, who already had enough to take personally, considering they gave up 17 first half points and allowed the Seahawks to go into the locker room with a lead. You mentioned the Jimmy Ward, mind-boggling play before the half, hitting Geno Smith as he's sliding to the ground, which gives them an opportunity at a field goal. We may be able to revisit whether or not you like the squib kick decision by Shanahan prior to, but regardless, that's a boneheaded play by Jimmy Ward. That's a boneheaded play by Jonathan Abram, but the Abram play is the one that costs you because, again, if you're the Seahawks, you are a 10-point or 9.5, 10.5, however you want to find the line, underdog on the road. You do not want to give an opponent any bulletin board material mid-game, especially when you have played just about as perfect of a half of football as you could hope for in a playoff scenario. So it's not just Deebo Samuel. George Kittle took that personally. Brandon Ayuk took that personally. Brock Purdy, who was banging his chest after throwing touchdowns, clearly took it personally. I'm sure Kyle Shanahan took that personally. He was on the field in the middle of that scrum after the play. You could see him mouthing BS. That is bull bleep. Like, you cannot do that to my players. So that woke up the 49ers, and also maybe have on the other side of the football have a Fred Warner who has already given some impassioned pregame speeches prior to Seattle games, the one that went viral up at Lumen Field. I'm sure there was one before the game on Saturday. Probably is going to his guys like, hey, they're going to treat us like that. This is what we need to do, which is 49er football. You do not, and remember the Titans, I do not want them to gain another yard. And that is what it seemed like the 49ers defense took upon themselves. So whether it was Deebo taking it personally, I know he ended up with 165, most of it on that 74-yard touchdown score, or the rest of the offense. Jonathan Abram woke up a sleeping giant, and then 5 plays later, they punched it in for a touchdown. Ensuing possession, you get the fumble. Charles Omenihu with a fantastic play, and the 49ers are off to the races. So it was just bad news bears for Seattle. And if you're Jonathan Abram, I know that's not maybe the end-all, be-all of the game. There's a lot more that went wrong for the Seahawks because of what the 49ers did, but that's a play you cannot make after the play. And like you said, with the Niners, arguably their best offensive player.
Yeah, you're right. And you mentioned both of I think the 2 biggest plays in the game. Obviously all the touchdowns mean a lot as well, but it was the Jonathan Abram leg twist, and then it was the Charles Omenihu strip sack. That was an incredibly important play because the Seahawks, they were down by 6 after the Niners touchdown on the Brock Purdy sneak after that Deebo Samuel, Jonathan Abram play. So Niners go up by 6 in the third quarter, and then you get towards the end of the third quarter, still just a 6-point game, and Seattle is driving. In fact, they have a 1st and 10 from the 15-yard line. Ultimately, they get a 2nd and 9, and then Geno Smith completes a pass to Tyler Lockett down to the 7 for 7 yards, setting up what you think would be a 3rd and 2. But no, there was an ineligible man downfield. The Seahawks got called for 2 of those in this game, so it backs them up. Instead of a 3rd and 2 from the 7, it's a 2nd and 14 from the 19. Incompletion to DK Metcalf. That was good coverage by Mooney Ward there, setting up a 3rd and 14. And that's where the pressure finally got to Geno Smith. Initial pocket disrupted by Nick Bosa. Doesn't get credit for a quarterback hit, a pressure, or anything, but he disrupted the pocket, allowed Charles Omenihu and his long arms to knock the ball free of Geno Smith, and then it just happened to bounce past an offensive lineman who was unaware of where the ball was, and Nick Bosa falls on it, and then just a handful of plays later, the 49ers are in the end zone again early in the fourth quarter. They get the 2-point conversion, and suddenly they're up by 14 points, 31-17. And at that point, you could kind of feel the tide turning. So in a matter of just 2 drives, but a handful of minutes of game time, you had the decision by Jonathan Abram to twist Deebo Samuel's leg. Then you had the Charles Omenihu strip sack recovered by Nick Bosa. Those are the 2 big turning points in this game. And if either of those things don't happen, we're probably talking about an entirely different ball game. But the good news for the 49ers is they both happened, and they were on the right side of those, and they never looked back.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was a complete performance in that second half, and that's why I feel like the tale of 2 halves is appropriate for this game, because the 49ers, it isn't as if they didn't show up in the first half, but clearly Seattle had a game plan that they were, in my opinion, able to implement, obviously more than in the second half, but they sort of dictated the pace in that first half. A little bit surprisingly, but in the second half, Mark, the 49ers, I felt like, especially defensively, and I'm glad that we're able to talk about Nick Bosa, because his brother absolutely infuriated me later in that day on Saturday.
No.
Joey. But Nick Bosa was absolutely fantastic, along with Dre Greenlaw, who, of course, returned from injury, led the team with 11 tackles. Eric Armstead had a sack. That's not something he usually gets because he's so busy creating room for the Bosas, the Omenihus, the Ebukoms, and everyone else to screech through. But the Niners defense, they showed me in the second half that they don't have to play a full 60 minutes of high top tier football for this team to have a chance to win. And a lot of that is because of what Brock Purdy and the offense is doing, along with Kyle Shanahan. But the defense, if they pitch a quality start, to put it in baseball terms, if they give you 6 innings and allow 3 earned runs, if they play a decent half of football, the 49ers have an excellent chance to win any game. And especially if you give them a single turnover, which the Seahawks did. We discussed in our preview episode how if you give the 49ers a plus turnover differential, they are going to make you pay, and they are likely going to beat you. And in the case of the Seattle Seahawks, they are going to embarrass you like they did, outscoring them 25-6 in the second half. So for the defense, I know they did not play great the first 30 minutes. I don't think the offense did as well individually, but in the second half, D'Amico Ryans and that Seahawks defense, or pardon me, that 49ers defense established itself or reestablished itself as the defense we have known to come and love, which is number 1 in the league for a reason.
Yeah, and there's two sides to that turnovers coin. There's forcing turnovers, and then there's not turning the ball over yourself. And the stat that I had on the preview episode towards the very end when we were making our picks was entering this game in the regular season, the Niners, when committing 0 or 1 turnovers in games, 13-0. When committing 2 or more, 0-4. So really not even obviously forcing turnovers helps. And in a lot of those 13 wins, they forced at least a turnover. But if they just take care of the ball, if at worst they're even on the turnover differential, Evan, they're going to win that game. If you are to beat the 49ers with all of their offensive weapons and with how good their defense is, you don't need to just be even on the turnover battle. You need to win the turnover battle. The Niners will beat you if the turnover battle is even. It might be a close competitive game, but opponents need to win that battle. And that's where the 49ers have been elite over the last 2+ months now. During this 11-game winning streak, 10 games to close the regular season, and now here in the wild card round against the Seattle Seahawks. I know we kind of checked in on the number, the turnover differential number, every week in the early part of the season. It was hanging around -2, up to -1, oh, back down to -2. It was hanging around there when this team was floundering. When they were 3-4, they were in the negatives. What happened? They stopped turning the ball over. Credit Jimmy Garoppolo for starting that trend, and they started forcing turnovers, and that has continued through every single one of these 11 games that the Niners have won consecutively. There's two sides to that turnover coin. They're forcing them, and they're taking care of the ball on the other side.
Yeah, and it sure helps when you get 500 yards of total offense from the other side of the ball. I mean, and that's really what we're talking about, Mark. And the conversation, the first probably half of the season before Garoppolo started to play what I think we identified as perhaps his best football of his career was, all right, how many games can this defense win you? You know, how many games can this defense keep you in to the point where we're talking about a team giving up 13, 14, 15 points a game on average? Well, now it's just allow a team to get 20 points. I mean, 23 at the beginning of this year, I would look at it and say, wow, that's a tough day for the 49ers defense. 23 points would be a lot on a team that we were comparing to all-time greats and was on an historic pace. But now with what the offense is doing, Mark, it's just can you allow the offense to get you a lead, and can you hold it? And that does not seem to be an insurmountable task for this defense, especially when you have Brock Purdy, in my opinion, reinventing ways to capitalize on red zone opportunities, and a running game that now spearheaded by Christian McCaffrey, but Elijah Mitchell back in the fold. We saw Deebo Samuel get some carries. We saw Jordan Mason finish out the game for the 49ers on Saturday. They are playing their best football right now. And the train against a Seattle team that we thought might give you a little bit of a fit, considering it was the third time you faced them, almost brought the best out of this 49ers team to the point where next week we're going to be talking about Dallas or Tampa Bay, but I'm not really sure either one of them I feel confident in.
Yeah, I do want to talk about the red zone as well.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, they were better in the second half, but there were still some issues in the first half. I mean, the Niners were scoring on just about every single drive that they had in this game, but they were still kicking field goals. And I still think the red zone is the one, I don't know if I want to say issue, but It's the one thing that has kind of lagged behind as the offense has taken off. I mean, they're actually, believe it or not, their red zone efficiency has gone down since Jimmy Garoppolo's injury. They were middle of the pack, right around 15th, with a above 55% conversion rate, scoring touchdowns on their red zone appearances. That number has dropped below 54% since. So not a gigantic jump, but when you consider it's only a 6-game span, that's a relatively, that's a statistically significant number, and they're down to 18th on the season. So Brock Purdy, the one area where he hasn't been able to lead this team to immaculate success offensively has been in the red zone, and that was the issue in the first half. I mean, the Seahawks, aside from that field goal at the last second, they had 2 scoring drives in their first 4 drives, and they were both touchdowns. The Niners had 3 scoring drives on their first 3 drives. Only one was a touchdown. That was the difference in the game. The Niners were settling for field goals while Seattle was punching it into the end zone. Now, of course, everything changed in that second half, and the Niners got it figured out. But when you are, assuming this team advances far into the playoffs, as they certainly hope to do, when you're playing an elite defense, a better defense, or an elite offense, or both, you're going to need to score touchdowns and not settle for field goals. So that's still the one area I'm a little worried about for this Niner offense, but of course they're putting up 41 points. It's hard to complain that much. But if you had to identify one spot where there was maybe a little bit of an issue, I think it's still the red zone.
That's interesting, and it is something to keep an eye on. But to me, Mark, it really just has to do with how well they can run the football. Because look, Brock Purdy's 4 touchdowns is nothing to scoff at. I do not want to take anything away from him. But where I saw this offense be stagnant, and look, Brock Purdy was, 9 of 11 in the second half. It wasn't as if he had to throw the ball all over the field repeatedly. But in the first half, it was because I just felt like they were not good on first down, whether it be Kyle Shanahan choosing to throw the football or them not being able to run the ball effectively. So for me, when it comes down to the red zone, I do want to see a little more Christian McCaffrey early. And I also feel like Brock Purdy, on a third down, I felt like they were a bit more compromised in that first half as far as being behind the sticks or playing close to the sticks. So I see what you're saying about the red zone, but it also does feel like they are getting to the red zone significantly more. And so
True.
some of those field goal opportunities, sure, you would like to score touchdowns. And I mean, they could have hung 50 on Seattle on Saturday if they had scored all their touchdowns, but also the amount of red zone opportunities, I would guess, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would guess would be significantly higher with Brock Purdy as opposed to Jimmy Garoppolo. So I understand the efficiency. It's a little bit of an issue in this season. San Francisco is 19th in the league when it comes to red zone as a whole, but Brock Purdy also creates more chances just because between the 20s, it feels like this offense for San Francisco, which is weird to fathom considering where they started, but has become a bit of a juggernaut.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think you can, and I'm probably a little guilty of this as well. You see the red zone numbers and you think, oh man, you got to turn more of those into touchdowns. But the reality is, the more red zone opportunities you get, the more field goals you're going to take as well. And of course, you take a field goal over a punt. And if you're punting, you're not getting down to the red zone, and that doesn't even become a factor into the statistics. So, good point. I do understand that, and I'm not saying that this offense is worse with Purdy, and I'm not saying that at all. We talked about this at length over the last month. It's certainly better. Every single statistic bears that out. If you had to pick a weakness of an elite group right now, it is still probably that. But I agree with the number of red zone opportunities they're getting. It's not as large of an issue as maybe in the Jimmy Garoppolo era when they were not getting nearly as many opportunities down there in that area of the field. So I do agree with that. That's a good point.
Yeah, and it was also it was just kind of weird to think about because in the first half, like they were 10 for 110 on the ground. It wasn't like they couldn't run the football. And I know a lot of that was because of Christian McCaffrey's 68-yard burst on his first touch on that second drive. But also for me, it's just being able to when things get a little bit tighter and the defense obviously gets more constrained when you're inside the 20. Can you efficiently run the football? Can you be physical at the line of scrimmage? That's something I also want to see a bit more early and downs from Kyle Shanahan in this offense.